Vasco is defeated by Olimpia and loses the chance to put qualification on track from the top spot in Group G of the Copa Sudamericana. Vasco even took the lead in the match but ended up conceding the comeback and had a player sent off. I'm Pedro Cobale, Vasco's beat reporter at Lance, and together we'll analyze how this match went, some important details from this game played over in Paraguay. First of all, follow Lance here on YouTube, leave a like as well, it's really important for us, and let's talk a little about how this game went. Vasco's approach was clear from the start. Defend deeper, give the ball to the opponent, and let Olimpia leave space behind their defense. So that Vasco's players, like Nuno Moreira and also Marino Nestrosa, could take advantage and manage to transition quickly, creating good counterattacks. And that's what happened at some point in the first half. Despite giving up many opportunities to the Paraguayan team, which finished the first half with 14 shots, Vasco had space to counterattack. But they kept making mistakes in that final detail, the last pass or even the finish. Especially Marino, who recently played a good match in the Sudamericana, was starting to establish himself for Vasco. But today, once again, he barely resembled that Marino from a few weeks ago. With a lot of difficulty finishing plays, making decisions, so it seems like he took a step back in his development in Brazilian football. Of course, this fluctuates from game to game, but today Marino's performance was below par. Many wrong decisions from the player alongside Lomiano. Vasco took the lead with a goal near the end of the first half. Maybe Vasco didn't even deserve that goal, but it was a very well taken corner. Delivered by Luno onto Cuesta's head, who headed it very well and managed to open the scoring. The situation was very favorable for Vasco. An away draw would have left Vasco in control of its own fate to finish top of the group in the next match against Baraka Central at São Januario, right? Vasco chose to bring young players, a very mixed squad for this match in Paraguay. Starters like Leo Jardim and David, who usually start, and Cuesta, who is suspended for the weekend, also traveled and started. Hugo Moura, who sometimes starts, did as well. And also youth players, reserve players like Marino, like Nuno, and also youth players, like I said, right? Yeah, the young players who are making the transition to the professional team like Avelar, also like Ramon Rick, who started, right? And players who are really from the under-20 team like Samuel, Zuccarello, and so on. A very mixed squad that is not used to playing together, but this is a choice by coach Renato Gaucho, who from the beginning made it very clear that his preference would be to focus on the Brazilian Championship and not on the Sudamericana. This sparked a very strong debate among the fans about whether it was the right approach, if it was worth thinking that way, because if Vasco won there in Paraguay, Vasco would basically secure themselves as the group leader. And by finishing first instead of second, you eliminate 2 matches, right? That playoff match where the second place team from the Sudamericana faces the third place team eliminated from the Libertadores. So in this way, you can in a way shorten the schedule by cutting out 2 matches anyway. So that's a criticism. On the other hand, Renato also made it very clear that it's not just because of the match, right? It's not about resting players for that game. There's a whole issue of logistics, of travel, which wears the player out, and then he misses training here in Rio de Janeiro anyway. These are choices made by the coach who, from the beginning, made it clear that the Sudamericana would not be a priority. Vasco finally wins the first half, goes into the break with the lead with a calmness that they could even concede a goal and it wouldn't be a bad result for the giant of the hill. In the second half, it basically goes the same way as the entire first half. Vasco gives the ball to the opponent attacks, and Vasco looks for counterattacks. Vasco even had the best chances in the first part of the second half. They pressed well, came close to increasing the lead, but just like they struggled with finishing and decision-making in the final third of the field, that happened in the second half too. You know, Marino again making a few mistakes in that part. Anyway, Vasco let opportunities slip by, and then at some point they paid the price. Olimpia managed, with a corner kick play, actually pretty similar to Vasco's, to tie the match. And then there's João Vitor's red card. From a play that, well, he's a young guy who ended up going in too hard on the opponent, probably because of nerves. While trying to win the ball, he ended up committing a clear red card foul, an easy decision for the referee to make. And then Vasco was down a man, and it becomes that question, what do I need to do? Do I need to attack? Do I need to go for the win? Obviously, since a draw was favorable for Vasco, they decided to pull back even more, added another defender, and put in another defensive midfielder. Anyway, they invited Olimpia even more into their defensive half. And as time went by, Olimpia kept creating opportunities until after a free kick, the Paraguayan team scored the goal that turned the game around. And then Vasco, already with one player down and a team set up to defend, basically couldn't create any real goal chances against their opponent. Olimpia even made it 3-1 with Sebastian Ferreira in one of the last plays of the match. Sebastian was a striker for Vasco but didn't make much impact with fans. If I recall, he didn't score any goals for Vasco. So he's a player who gave that classic ex-player's revenge feeling, especially since, as I said, he wasn't missed here. He sealed Olimpia's victory against Vasco. At the press conference, Lazzaroni, who actually went to the match as Marcelo Sals's assistant since Sals was sent off in the first half, attended the press conference because anyone who is sent off can't participate in it. So Lazzaroni, who gave the press conference, criticized the refereeing a lot because of the lack of consistency. He complained a lot about the play that led to the foul, right? Which caused the second goal. He saw inconsistency. He even agreed with the sending off. Like I said, it was an easy decision to make, but he also took the pressure off João Vitor, said he's young, that he's starting his first match. Anyway, in any case, he also said that Vasco will go into the last match to play their own game, without thinking about their rivals, to win the match and then see who qualifies, who goes through in first place, and who goes through in second. Vasco returns to the field next Sunday against Red Bull Bragantino at 8:30 p.m. at São Januário. Vasco is in a somewhat strange situation in the Brazilian Championship. A kind of intermediate zone, 2 points away, not that far from the top 6 either. So Vasco has this match to get closer again to put themselves on move back up the standings. An important match where Vasco should have their starting lineup again, right? Obviously, with this rotation that Renato does, it's even a bit hard for us to define what Vasco's starting lineup is. But the fans already know, right, that some players have their spot there, like Thiago Mendes, Rorais, Rojas, Puma, in Paulo Henrique's absence, Robert Renan, and so on. Fans already know the core of the starting team. So Vasco should see these faces back on the field in the next game against Red Bull Bragantino. And in the middle of next week, there's the match against Barracas Central, a decisive game in the Sudamericana. And it's quite possible that we'll see a stronger Vasco team on the field, a team with more starters as well. First, because it's the last game before the World Cup break. So it would be the last push before the players get some relief and rest, right? And there's also no issue with traveling. So the wear and tear would be less for these starters, especially thinking about the last match against Atlético Mineiro before the World Cup break. So we can see a more complete Vasco side against Barracas, which is the team that's last in the group. It's the team that Vasco drew with away from home, using a heavily rotated lineup. So with the main squad, Vasco has every chance to get the result. And then see if they qualify in first or second place, depending on whether Olimpia loses and a bit on goal difference. Anyway, you can find these details about the scenario and qualification on the Lance website. That's it. Let's stay tuned here on Lance to follow Vasco's week and see how they're preparing for this match against Red Bull Bragantino. And also for the Sudamericana decider, right? The first phase of the Sudamericana against Barracas Central next Wednesday.
So did you like this video? So like it, share it with your friends, and go ahead and subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you receive all the notifications for the content published here on Lance TV.